Okay, so that. Everybody awake? Testing, testing. Does that work for everybody? Get to listen to myself talk. Not disorienting at all. How's everybody doing? We awake after that turkey lunch that I made a executive decision on passing on so that you all wouldn't have to watch me sleep up here? All right, well, one more question. So how many signed up for this session using the online interface and got a good look at Brian Contos? Okay, if you did, then I know what you're thinking. Brian spent some time tanning over the last few days, right? So I am not Brian Contos. My name is Dana Porter. I am a sales engineer with Verodin. We are a provider of an up-and-coming security instrumentation platform. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about what Brian had originally intended to explore with you a little bit, and that is the idea of industrializing red and blue teaming. Now, by quick way of background, I have worked in and around InfoSec and cybersecurity for about the last 20 plus years. I spent a lot of time as a security practitioner working in and out of enterprise, and then I went into sales, back out of sales, back into engineering, and so on. But the reason I say all this is because I am here now because I really, at some point along the way, I like to tell myself that I like the idea of protecting multiple missions, helping multiple organizations, fostering relationships, and helping multiple teams be able to achieve whatever their security goals are, as opposed to just the mission of whoever happened to be my employer at the time. I also, I'm standing up here in front of you today through a conversation that I had with one of my colleagues. I'm actually from the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, and one of my colleagues in the Houston area was telling me about some cool stuff that somebody was doing with having systems that basically run attacks against each other. And, of course, to somebody, to an audience like you, I'm sure that you can appreciate the novelty of that sort of thing, at least at a high level. So anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about why I'm standing here today. So Brian, if you know Brian, you know that he has a way with word usage, with word selection. So when he decided he was going to title this Industrialization of Red and Blue Teaming, I thought, that's pretty cool. But why industrialization? Why, of all things that red teamers and blue teamers think about, why would we be talking about industrialization? And I don't know that this thing is going to stay on. We'll get through this together, right? All right, let's try this again. So, talking about industrialization, I am one of those people that I believe that words have meaning, specific words have specific meaning, and I thought that I immediately zeroed in on the use of the word industrialization. Brian's choice, not my choice. But then I started to explore this a little bit, and I thought, there's definitely something here, and I'm going to have a little bit of fun exploring this, and then hopefully we all get to have some fun together as I communicate some of my findings to you. So, words on the screen, right? You may or may not be able to read them. If you cannot, I apologize. But essentially, we have a couple of definitions up here, right? So, industry, Merriam-Webster defines industry as, or has in its definition of industry, systematic labor, especially for some useful purpose or the creation of something of value. And then also, diligence in an employment or pursuit, especially steady or habitual effort. So maybe you can see where I'm going with this. And then industrialization is, of course, pertaining to industry, or the act or process of making something industrial. But what we are going to explore specifically today is going to be in and around automation of using specialized tools and processes. So let's do a quick exercise. When you think of industrialization, what are some modern day, maybe not so modern day examples of industrialization that you have? Just throw them at me. Okay. Any others? Mobile phones? Okay. So Can anybody tell me what this is? Can you see it okay? Wikipedia stock photo of the cotton gin. All right, how about this one? Henry Ford's moving assembly line ushered in the Industrial Revolution. I believe it's widely accepted that the moving assembly line was where we officially started to see the Industrial Revolution. So these are good examples, historical examples, granted. How about something that is maybe more near and dear to the world that you and I live in? Who can tell me what this graphic represents? DevOps? Anybody in here familiar with DevOps? The cultural / arguably philosophical pairing or wedding, if you will, of development and operations in the pursuit of a common business objective, the ability to rapidly and reliably deploy systems in an iterative and cyclical fashion or repetitive fashion. I think DevOps is a really good example of modern day industrialization. Wouldn't you agree? Okay. These are all great examples, but what I would like to explore with you with the time that I have left is industrialization in the context of information security assessment and defense, or red and blue teaming. So first, let's look at some of the challenges around offensive efforts. They tend to be time and resource intensive, and they don't always translate to immediate or even long-term defensive value. And what I mean by this is that we have, I'm sure that many of you have seen, or hopefully you have seen, some of the challenges around red team exercises, and you determine the rules of engagement, you determine the scope, you determine the parameters, and you perform an assessment or series of assessments, and then you have some output, and then that output gets, if it's depending on its actionability, if you will, that output gets triaged and gets prioritized along with other security operations or business efforts, right? The problem with that is at the best case scenario there is that these findings actually do get remediated. And even what we're finding is once the findings do get remediated, there's no guarantee that something is not going to happen between the point in time of the initial assessment and then whenever the next assessment comes around, that something's not going to happen to reintroduce risk into that environment through some sort of a change. So that is what I mean when I say that offensive efforts, red team efforts, don't always translate to immediate business value. And we'll explore this more in just a moment. But let's talk about the defenders for just a second. Has anybody had any experience with or faced, dealt with the challenge of defenders not really working with an attacker's mindset? Well, the obvious challenge there is not being able to operate within the attacker's mindset means that you're going to be somewhat of a loss as far as being able to actually tune the defensive controls, the processes and the technology. And I have, as a quick aside, I've actually seen firsthand some really promising efforts around the area of the country that I live in, up in North Texas. A CISO friend of mine is actually responsible. He actually built out, he's part of the DFW hacker underground community, if you will, and he actually built out a red and blue program where he rotates his staff. Like his staff will be, they'll do all their red for a month or two, and then the blue will do response for a month or two, and then they'll switch. And a lot of that is because of his passion for cybersecurity. You know, the guy is a bona fide. I mean, if I threw his handle out to you, you've probably heard of him, but I'm not going to do that. But he, his passion is what drives that. You know, many organizations don't have that level of drive or that level of expertise, but that is really how you start to crack the nut of the defenders being able to really adequately and efficiently tune the controls, and because they're able to operate within that attacker's mindset. So what we really need to see, and what we are starting to see more and more, or starting to drive the, champion the messaging of more and more, is how about the red teamers really we start looking at offensive efforts, and we start judging the value of those efforts on their ability to measurably improve defenses. And as opposed to just scanning, finding an exploit, validating the exploit, writing up the findings, and then lather, rinse, repeat, and do it again. When we start to do this, when we really start to take offense's efforts and marry that with a real desire to measurably, not just improve, but to measurably improve defensive efforts, then that's when we have a concept that maybe you have heard of, that we're starting to hear more and more of purple teaming, which is essentially some degree of symbiosis between a symbiotic mutualism between red and blue, where both are working to use their knowledge, their respective knowledge, and establish a known good, and then figure out how to measure, manage, improve, and communicate against that known good or that baseline. Okay? So, speaking of measuring, managing, improving, and communicating cybersecurity effectiveness, this is a good place for me to dovetail, to segue for just a second, if you will. And I just want to say that cybersecurity, and one of the reasons that we're so gung-ho about what we do is because cybersecurity has historically not been managed as you would manage any other business unit. You know, business risk is managed in much a different way. Business risk is managed differently from cybersecurity risk, in that cybersecurity tends to get money just thrown at it, right? Especially after a serious incident, after a major breach or whatever. There's that old adage, the checkbook opens up after a major breach, right? Well, that's not sound. If we're honest with ourselves, that's not really sound business principle. You know, if we look at some of the others up here, financial performance, some of the other KPIs up here, patient mortality rate. You know, these things are measurables, and measurables are what business, by and large, makes its decisions on. And the problem with cybersecurity is, yeah, we have metrics. We have, I'm sure that some of you have built out metrics programs. I've built out metrics programs. You honestly can make metrics tell whatever story you want them to tell in pursuit of whatever it is you're in pursuit of. But it's not really, and up until recently, it hasn't really been measurement driven. And this whole idea of figuring out how to get quantifiable data, how to get empirical evidence out of the systems, out of the people, out of the processes, in order to start making key, sound, security or security-driven business decisions, is really why I'm up here standing in front of you. So I'll just leave you with one quick note. For 2018, Gartner forecasts that organizations by the end of 2018 will have spent in excess of $96 billion on security tools and services to protect against and recover from cyber attacks. And as such, I have seen personally, my colleague down here in the corner, we go into organizations all the time, and we're starting to see with some of these larger organizations, we're starting to see headcount created for security program validation operations. Basically, people who are charged with coming in and making heads or tails of this security fiscal black hole. So, with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about security instrumentation and how it relates to industrialization. Now, before I go any further, security instrumentation is first on the list here. I want to make it very clear that there are other ways of cracking this nut. Each has its place, each has its unique positioning, and each has its own set of capabilities, its own set of pros and cons, if you will. I'm up here as, obviously, I'm a Verodin employee, so I talk a little bit about what I know. I can do this without, you're not here to be pitched to, and I am not here to pitch to you. I'm here to share my knowledge with the space with you, and how and what security instrumentation, what value security instrumentation in general lends to the automating red and blue teaming synergy with specialized tools and processes. So here we go. What you see in front of you is a graphic representation of a security instrumentation platform, or SIP. And SIPs in general are the I'm just going to put my hand. Does it distract anybody if I just keep my hand up here? Come on, who's awake? Anybody still awake? Anybody still with me? Awesome. All right. If I get too loud, just tell me. Anyway, so security instrumentation platforms are the first business platforms for security, and they are designed to provide empirical data to power decision making. Now, we call this a business platform. I call this a business platform because, yes, it is doing security things, which we'll explore a little bit more, obviously, but while we're doing things in and around security, while we're performing security-related actions, we're driving a business discussion, because the outcome of this is designed to be that which is actionable from a business perspective. We're all about providing or producing empiric data or evidence, and that enables the organization, the security organization, to finally start to govern itself as a sound business unit, not as a security enclave, but as a business unit. And this is important because the ability of the security program to function in this way means that you really start to drive, that the organization really starts to drive a conversation with the business, where it basically gives the security organization a seat at the table, and further drives home the messaging that security leadership gets, that the business is not there for security, right? It's the other way around. Security exists solely for the safe enablement of the business in pursuit of its objectives. All right. So the SIP, or the Security Instrumentation Platform, exists to provide evidence for decision making, right? Well, what kind of evidence are we talking about, and what kind of decision making are we talking about? Well, so again, quantitative analysis. I haven't really explained that in depth at this point, but through quantitative analysis provided through security instrumentation, you really start to, these things will really start to make sense, and we're going to explore these next. But you're probably thinking, or I hope you're thinking, okay, he's kind of, I'm kind of smelling what he's cooking. We'll start to talk about security in a much bigger business, light. The business at large uses evidence-driven KPIs, evidence-driven metrics to make its decisions, so we should probably be doing the same thing with security. What has any of this, Dana, not Brian, what has any of this got to do with red and blue teaming? We're going to go into that next. I think this is the part all of you have been waiting for, hopefully. All right, so here is one example of security instrumentation, and when I say that, I'm talking about this is one approach. Granted, it's our approach, but this is a approach to getting evidence out of the systems, getting empirical data out of your systems, out of your processes that you can use to really start driving this conversation. So what you see in front of you, essentially what you want to do is you want to start figuring out ways, and again, you can do this through multiple different ways, right? But you want to start figuring out ways to do real things, like real malicious behaviors, right? But you want to do these in an environment that is as representative to the real environment as possible. Well, how about production? How about the production environment? Okay, Dana, how the heck are you going to do that? How do I do that and not, basically generate a what is it called? A resume generating event, I think is what it's called. How do I do that? Well, in Verodin's case, you're looking at, you have a management engine, if you will, or a director, and then we have a director-actor architecture. We call it this. Think of like bit players in a movie, in a motion picture, or whatever, right? You have the actors who basically they take on a role on the screen, and then you have the director that basically orchestrates how things are supposed to happen. Sample network environment, sample environment, right? Sample production environment. Broken up with logical points of delineation, where we call these zones, and these are points of, these are basically choke points in the environment that are going to be broken up either by process or by technology. For the sake of this discussion, we're talking about breaking them up by technology. And then the actors, which I mentioned before, you have your security controls across the bottom. These are representative. These can be pretty much anything. But the actors actually get deployed in these individual zones. And then what the director is going to do, based upon the configurations, based upon your goals, based upon the things that you want to achieve, based upon the real world scenarios that you want to simulate, right? The director is going to reach out, and in accordance with the scenario that you want to play out, the director is going to start doing a couple of things. First, it's going to tell the actors involved, in accordance with the test that you want to run, it's going to tell the actors involved where they need to be, what they need to be doing as far as what types of tests need to be run, and essentially where they're, which actors at what points of the network need to start doing things. So what's going to happen next? Actor A on the right on the internet takes on, in this scenario, actor A takes on the role of being the attacker, actor B, and a high-value target, up here it says business zone, takes on the role of being a target, right? They're actors. Attacker, actor, target, actor. The attacker actor is going to do what? He's going to start attacking. He's not attacking your network, he's attacking his counterpart at the other end of the network, right? Real live fire malicious activities happening across the environment, and what do you think happens next? How do you think interaction time? What do you think the tools that you see across the bottom there, what are those tools going to do? Yes, they're going to fire in accordance, I like to say, with their capabilities and their configurations. They don't know that this isn't real. They don't know that this isn't real real malicious traffic, folks. As far as they're concerned, an attack is actually in progress. But wait, it gets better. For security instrumentation, for you to be able to have this is fine and good, right? This right here is called breach and attack simulation. But as far as getting evidence, actionable evidence out of your systems and being able to use that to start driving those conversations that we talked about, a couple of other things need to happen. At a management level, you need to be able to reach into these tools to find out what they know about that attack, right? It's not enough just to perform the attacks. For security instrumentation, you really need to be able to look into the tools to find out what the tools had to say. And to take it one step further, this is where the real challenge is. You need to be able to reach into your aggregation platform, your collection platform, your security information and event management platform, your SIM. You need to be able to reach into those tools to find out what actually made it to the SIM. And why is that? Because we all know that SIM is expensive, SIM is time consuming, SIM is difficult, SIM is very specialized, and SIM probably 75, maybe more than that % of the time does not get efficiently tuned. And we'll actually see some numbers to back up that assertion here in just a minute. SIM is very difficult, and in order to really be able to start to tune your analysts, so to speak, you need to start tuning your SIM. All right, so that was a little architecture, not so much of Verodin, but architecture of what instrumentation looks like and how you can really start to automate some of these things and make your attack and response teams a little bit more efficient. Let's dig into the red just a little bit, and I am going to, at this point, I'm going to throw up here a quick little video that I made, and I'm just going to explain it along the way so that you can actually see what this would look like if you were basically hands-on keyboard. Is that okay with everybody? All right, I'll put this down, and I'm going to click with this hand. All right, so what you see in front of you, this is another representation of the map that I showed you from the architecture diagram just a little bit ago. You have your, you have these locks represent those zones that we talked about. I don't think this is moving. Let's try it again. There it goes. You have your zones, and then you have your little actors. Explain the actors just a little bit. We actually have, in this example, you see that there are network actors, which are what were in the other example, and then you have some. Then you want to be able to do endpoint assessments as well, so that you can do those as well. Now, where I'm going to go next is, so actions are basically the building blocks of all of this, right? When we talk about actions, we're talking about basically these represent the theoretical, the real and theoretical bad things that can happen in the environment. What you see here is an action library. And the point of this is something that needs to be not only, I mean, it's all great that we have threat feeds and everything else, behavior research teams internally, but you also want to be able to ingest your own data as well. Basically your own samples, your own PCAPs, post-incident response PCAPs, and so on and so forth. I've now moved into the, what we call evaluations. And evaluations are really where the rubber's going to meet the road from a red team perspective, because red teams have their playbooks, right? You have your playbooks that you maintain, you have your playbooks that you add to, so on and so forth. As a matter of fact, I'm sorry, I have not moved into that yet. I'm going to that next. Right now, I'm demonstrating some detail around what a particular action looks like, whether it be behavior detection alerts, which is what you're seeing right now, things that might actually make it, things that you can expect to see in your analysis platforms, and so on and so forth. But now we're looking at Now we're looking at the evaluations, which are iterative, basically iterations on a specific action. Case in point, you might, if you map to the MITRE attack framework like we do, you can actually start to iterate your actions in many different ways. You can do this from a DLP's perspective, where you might encode a particular piece of PII multiple different ways. Zip it 1 time, zip it 2 times, zip it 10 times, and see how your DLP controls respond to that. You want to be able to do that. And then another example, maybe an obvious example of this, is the multiple variants of the of whatever malware du jour you have out there. Fine, my semantic, my SEP 11, SEP 14, I think it's SEP 14. My SEP 14 responds just fine to this version of WannaCry, but what about this other variant that just basically hit the wild? How do I guard against that? Well, rather than creating individual actions, you want to be able to create evaluations and then build upon those evaluations and then add those to your run books. Make sense? What we're looking at now, I think, is we've moved on into sequences. And sequences, think of a sequence as an end-to-end campaign, right? What we're looking at right here, I don't know if you can see it okay, but there are essentially multiple groups of actions here. And we've got what's represented here is a standard post-phishing watering hole attack, compromised website, I downloaded a component, and let me just pause this for a second so I can catch up. Downloaded a malware component. Now my desktop is owned. I'm going to start moving laterally, looking for something as I start to get to a target of opportunity, or a high-value target, if you will. Now I've gotten to this target. I've gained access to this target. I've gained access to something interesting in this target's file system. Now I want to exfiltrate that data. Well, with the concept of taking an action and building it into a sequence, you can start to do these things. You can start to build out end-to-end attack campaigns. So when any of you, if you have a colleague that just got hit by something nasty and it was a multi-stage attack, you can actually rebuild in an instrumentation platform. You can rebuild that attack in your own environment and then safely run that attack in your production environment so that you can start to determine where your gaps are. And we'll talk here in just a moment about how we expose those gaps. So I think we're all caught up, and essentially what I'm doing here, I may just go ahead and fast forward here. Yeah, I think we're okay. What's happening right here is building out that attack, basically what that looks like, selecting the actors involved. It's multi-stage, so it's multiple actors. First stage would be desktop to the internet, second stage would be desktop to server, and then third stage would obviously be server out to the internet. Build that, start to put it together, run it, and then fast forward to the end. We start to see, as we're running this job, we start to see some things pop up real time as far as what was blocked, what wasn't blocked, what was detected, what wasn't detected in accordance with those actions being run, which you'll see here in just a moment. I think I'm actually talking a little bit faster than I planned to, but let's see. Yeah, here we go. So here it's running. Here the job is actually running. Now, I'm going to pop over because this is an action in progress. It takes a few minutes to run, obviously, because you want to start to get some data out of your protection platforms. But what's going to happen here is going to move over to a job status screen where this job has already been run. So you actually have the historic. You basically have the job history, and clicking into this one is basically what that former screen looked like, all wrapped up, all completed, and that's where we're going now. So what you can see here is this is what the, once you have run this campaign, once you've finished executing this campaign, you start to see where you have things that have been blocked as the left set of the left column, if you will, of green, red, and then an event generated is going to be the right-hand side. Clicking into one of these will basically just show you where you have alerts, what type of alerts were fired by your technologies. And essentially, if you can see this, you can see scrolling down, you can see in this example, for instance, Palo Alto had its own set of alerts. No surprise there, Palo Alto generates logs for everything. And then if you look further down, you can see that we actually have two SIMs in this lab, if you will, QRadar and Splunk. And then looking down at the bottom, you can actually see that you have rules that actually bubbled up, fired, that matched a correlation item within Splunk. And then, or I'm sorry, not rules, but alerts that matched a correlation item in Splunk, and then alerts that did not. So again, it's that whole SIM tuning conversation that we talked about, getting more bang for the buck out of the SIM, figuring out where the SIM is not providing value, and then actually being able to start working toward driving that conversation. So that's pretty much that. I won't belabor that point. So from a red team perspective, using instrumentation platforms or any of the open source tools out there, open source action simulation tools, breach and attack simulation platforms, all of these are designed to be able to basically add some real power to your ability to run really good assessments, really accurate assessments within your environments. Obviously, each of the tools have their own limited scope and they have their individual use cases, but this is just one example. So let's look at instrumenting or industrializing, if you will, blue for just a moment here. So going back to that job completion screen, and basically this is going to be a conversation about measuring drift. Well, how are we going to measure drift? Well, drift is defined as a deviation from a baseline, right? So once you have run the actions, in this example, once you have run the actions in your environment the way that, in accordance with your objectives, then you need to be able to have some sort of a way to go in and set the system up, and this is where automation is really going to come into play. You want to be able to set up these jobs to be able to run on their own, but not only that, to be able to alert you whenever something deviates from your known good, if you will. So run the actions, get the results to the place where basically pass-fail is what you define it to be, and that's the other thing that's very important to note here, is a security instrumentation platform should not tell you what pass-fail is. You know, you, in your own environments, determine pass-fail. The example that I like to use, the common vulnerability scoring system. If any of you have managed a vulnerability management program, you know, there's a lot of subjectivity to something being dumped out of your Qualys or your Rapid7 or whatever that says, you know, this has a CVSS of 8, right? Well, you've got to take into account some environmental factors and so on and so forth, and then you've really got to determine whether that is a vulnerability that is real in your environment. So what we like to say is a security instrumentation platform is going to add some objectivity to your environment's subjectivity. And what I mean by that is you determine what's pass-fail, right? DLP, a quick DLP example, you might have a business use case where you have to have PII flying around your environment, but you need to be able to alert on it. So blocked would be a fail, or not blocked would be a pass, but not alerting would be a fail. And if you have a developer that wants to work from home and they siphon a bunch of data up to their Dropbox, well, not blocking that would obviously be a fail, right? So different use cases, you define pass-fail within the context of your objectives, and then Verodin is just going to, as an example, measure basically, and any security program, security instrumentation platform needs to be able to do this, is going to grade you based upon what you have defined for your environment, not on what that platform thinks is right or wrong, okay? So getting back to this real quick, when we talk about now that we know what defining pass-fail means, then we want to start measuring drift, and we'll do that through setting up repetitive actions that basically, whenever those actions result in a deviation from whatever your baseline is, you should be alerted accordingly, and that's what's happening here. Okay. Now, this is really where the symbiosis, if you will, is really going to come into play. All of this to this point has really been in an effort to provide some evidence, provide something that is going to be actionable for the security team, actionable for the business as a whole, actionable for senior leadership to really start making decisions as to what controls need to be improved upon, where do we have people or process gaps, so on and so forth. So it's all been about evidence, evidence, evidence. Well, how would a security instrumentation platform demonstrate evidence? What does that evidence look like? So what's happening here is this is a set of gauges. We call these our effectiveness gauges, and the purpose of this being up on the screen in front of you is to essentially communicate that you need to be able to drill down. Now that you're actually doing things in your environment, whatever platform you use, now that you're actually doing things in your environment, to be able to start to figure out where you have gaps, things that are getting through, things that are not getting through, things that are being alerted adequately, alerts that are actually reaching the SIM, so on and so forth. Now that you actually are doing these things, you need to be able to see where those gaps are. And basically all these gauges are designed to represent is some immediate drill down into where the gaps are from a technology perspective, right? So in the example that we have here, that highlighted gauge, if you will, represents malicious file transfer. So what you can see is that you have 227 actions that were run that correspond to malicious file transfer, and these aren't the only 4 in our case, there are others, but we use these by default. And you can see right away that of those 227 actions, 224 were not blocked. And you can see that in this case, 3 were blocked, and Palo Alto blocked them. But let's move to the next column, right? We've got 220 detections, and this is the kind of information that is not so readily available if you're not doing something similar to this, right? Because again, this is what this is designed for. It's fine that we had 220 detections, but we have 2 detection technologies in this environment, and Palo Alto actually detected near everything, but we had some gaps in Snort's detection. How about we fast forward over to the event management over at the far right for correlated events or notable events, right? We can see that in our lab environment, and lab environments do or can, and I've seen them firsthand, translate to real world production environments, but this is what you want, right? You want to know that you have, and not so much, most people don't have multiple SIMs deployed, but it's not so much a conversation about the fact that we're stacking up 2 SIMs against each other as it is that you have a lot of detections that were not acted upon, and that is what that last column represents. So again, SIM tuning. The thousands, sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of alerts that make it into the SIM, depending on the size of the organization, they don't do you a whole lot of good if you cannot correlate those into something that a human analyst can see. All right. So again, the purpose of everything that I've thrown at you today has been the production of evidence-powered decision-making. One of the things that, this is kind of a rubber meets the road moment for me. I hope it is for you too. This is a sample output from one of our own engagements, and this is not a selling tool so much as it is illustrating that this is a real problem. So what you see here, and it may be hard to see, again, if it is, I apologize. But what you're looking at here is that less than 1/4 of the attack patterns that were run in this sample engagement, and this is a real engagement, obviously sanitized, but less than 1/4 of the attack patterns that were run in this environment actually were blocked, and then less than half of what was actually blocked had a detection event that actually reached the SIM. So again, that's not only do we not have an enforcement problem with the lack of blocking, but we have a visibility problem as well. And then we also see scenarios where we see a lot of situations where actions do get blocked, but corresponding alerts don't reach the SIM or reach the log management solution, whatever that may be. And in that case, you have a situation where, yeah, it's good that you're doing blocking, but you know, it may be something that you want to know about. There may be an attack in progress that, yes, it was blocked, but maybe there's something correlatable there that you can take some sort of action on. And then finally, for the actions that do reach the SIM, again, I think I've belabored this point, but for the actions that actually do make the alerts that represent actions, or for the actions that have alerts that represent them actually make it into the SIM, we have seen that less than half of the correlation rules. Now, these are the rules that are actually configured in the SIM. This is a different way to look at SIM tuning. You've actually done the work of putting those rules into the management platform, putting those rules into the aggregation and correlation platform, but the rules aren't firing. So then in this engagement, and this is representative of many more, I think, you actually have rules that are there, but they don't fire. So what good is that? So again, SIM tuning discussion. All right, so that's pretty much all I had for you. I don't know how I am on time. Yeah, right about 40 minutes, I guess. I just want to close with a couple of thoughts. So when you industrialize, there's that word again, right? When you industrialize red and blue through security instrumentation, you start to do a couple of things. You have the ability to obviously to start tuning your security technologies, right? You can figure out where security technologies are missing things entirely, or maybe they're doing things, or maybe they're sending alerts, but they're not tuned to actually perform blocking. A lot of the detection platforms actually are very good at blocking as well, and this presents you with an opportunity to start to do so. That we can start to apply some configuration assurance to our environment, and this is huge. This is that whole drift discussion again. How many of your organizations have some sort of a change advisory board or change management organization? How many of you have had those clincher moments where you have a questionable change that's about to be introduced, and you're like, okay, well, we approve this, but I have a feeling we'll be right back here tomorrow. Anybody ever seen that? Got a couple of hands. So what automation in this regard really allows you to do, and this is near and dear to me because I did sit on a cab in my last, I think it was my last enterprise job before I moved back over here a few years ago, but one of the things, I used to see this all the time, in developments, in shops, especially agile shops where things are happening in very compressed sprints. I used to all the time, I'd like to think of myself as, I'm the security guy. I understand, I have a background in systems and network engineering before moving only over into security, so I understand system architecture, so on and so forth, but these guys are doing things that I just flat out don't understand. Problem is, they have to happen, right? These, again, security is there to safely enable the business, not the other way around. So we would approve these things, and we didn't get bitten a lot, but I would have loved to have had something orchestratable, something automated in hand to be able to help me determine right away where my key points of drift from a known good baseline were, especially with rapid development cycles like what we were dealing with, and some of you are no doubt dealing with as well. So I will just close with saying this, and I actually have this thought here in front. I'm not ashamed to read to you. We essentially need to readjust so that we are focusing on we need to think about things a different way. Let's focus on the effectiveness of our controls, and as opposed to just point and shoot and then pray, right? And with regard to red and blue teaming, let's just keep in mind that there really needs to be more of that we can all work together, at least in our own environments, within the context of our environments. We can really start to work together to start to drive that synergy, right? That symbiotic mutualism where both teams are actually working together, where the red team is working for the improvement of the blue team and everything that the blue team represents from a people, process, and technology perspective, where the blue team is getting better through looking at some of the things that are available through something like a security instrumentation platform. They start to get a better understanding of the things that the red team is doing, and then they can use that knowledge to not only better tune security controls, but then the red and blue can come together to start to establish, using their requisite knowledge silos, if you will, to start to establish and maintain that working baseline. All right? So that's all I have for you. What questions, comments, concerns? Dana, never come back here again? Turkey? I get it. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I didn't see the lights murder up here. Yeah, so if I understand the question, that's a very good question. Your ask was, in doing something like this and moving to something like this, or implementing and I'm obviously rephrasing your question, right? Let me know if I'm off base, but in doing something like this, it's somewhat of a paradigm shift. What is this? What is the impact to the employee community? Okay, so with regard to security instrumentation, if we go back to looking at the architecture, we are talking about, and these, in our case, these actors, think of these as sensors. These are sensors throughout the network, and they only attack one another. So the user community never comes into play here, even in the case of when we're talking about like an endpoint, positioning this from an endpoint perspective. We're talking about using an endpoint that is dedicated to that, where we're validating the controls on the endpoint. We're not so much doing anything to the user themselves. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? All right, well, if you're going to have to yell at me because I can't see you, but if I don't have any other questions, thank you for your time.